Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 6th webisode for CUPE Connects. Tonight's theme is From Land Acknowledgement to Land Back, Supporting Indigenous Communities. We are excited to be hosting a panel with incredible speakers and addressing such an important and timely issue. First, we have a wonderful message from Fred.
Thanks so much for that, Dawn. I'm Fred Hahn. I'm the president of CUPE Ontario, and I am zooming in tonight from the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat and the Patu First Nation, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. The territory that I'm zooming in from is also subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Ojibwe and Allied Nations to peacefully share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. And this territory is also covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. It was important for me to be here today to help to welcome all of you and to help to welcome our amazing and incredible panel of speakers. I wanted to remind us all that CUPE Ontario is invested in working toward reconciliation for Indigenous people, and that education and allyship are an important part of that. We have been supporting the fight at 1492 Land Back Lane by showing up on site to publicly show our solidarity and to amplify our message with their platform. We're also supporting their fight with donations to the legal fund, and you're going to be hearing more about that tonight. We're committed to calling out injustices wherever we see them. And this is the beginning of a conversation and the learning that we are doing, but it is also about unlearning. And I also wanted to send solidarity to folks in Ottawa who've been protesting there against systemic racism and against Black and Indigenous and racialized communities. They occupied space over this last weekend, and activists were promised a meeting with city officials. They were promised there would be no arrests, but there were numerous arrests, and in fact, 12 of the protesters were charged. I wanted you all to know that I'm also very proud that members from our union were immediately involved in that we immediately sent messages of solidarity, that CUPE members and other allies went to the police station to protest and demand the release of those activists. Part of reconciliation is showing up and being there. And I wanted you all to know that as the president of our union, we're committed to doing that. So thank you all. And I'm looking forward to this amazing panel tonight.
Thanks, Fred. So my name is Dawn Belrose, and I'm the chair of CUPE Ontario's Indigenous Council. I'm a member of Thessalon First Nation, and I'm zooming in tonight from the traditional territory of the Anishinaabeg and Métis people and covered by the Robinson-Huron Treaty Territory. Along with me tonight will be my co-host, Dana.
Thank you, Miigwech Dawn. Wache Milo Sipi Square, Nishnakasu, Musu Sipi, Nichuti Nila, Mayingan and Dodam. Hi everyone, my name is Dana Wesley. I'm a member of Moose Cree First Nation, and I'm also the Senior Officer Indigenous Issues in the Human Rights Department at CUPE National in Ottawa. Tonight, I'm joining you from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I'm happy to be here as co-host along with a strong panel of Indigenous leaders and activists. Hello to those who have joined us tonight on Zoom. We are also streaming this to Facebook, where people can watch live or can catch up later if they couldn't make it. Folks had the opportunity to submit questions in advance of the panel, and those have informed some of the questions we are asking today. We will also be sharing information in the chat bar tonight on both Zoom and Facebook, so you can keep learning more about the issues we are addressing tonight.
Thanks, Dana. I'm now going to briefly introduce tonight's panel before we get into the questions. Tonight with us is Skylar Williams. He is a Mohawk, Wolf Clan, and a member of Six Nations of the Grand River, who is an activist and an iron worker. Skylar has received national media attention as the spokesperson for the 1492 Land Back Lane, the site of an ongoing struggle to protect traditional territory from a planned housing development. Skylar is driven by the need to protect this Haudenosaunee territory for future generations, even while facing threats by political leaders, police, and developers. Welcome, Skylar. We also have with us tonight Suze Morrison. She is one of Suze Morrison is an NDP member of the Provincial Parliament for Toronto Centre. Suze is the official opposite critic for tenant rights, urban Indigenous issues, and missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. She has overcome significant adversity to get where she is today. Poverty, precarious housing, and learning how to understand her identity as a woman with mixed settler and Indigenous heritage are all critical parts of how she looks at the policy from a progressive and intersectional lens. MPP Morrison lives in Toronto Centre with her husband Trevor and their dog Nova. When she's not working for her community at Queen's Park, she is an avid motorsports enthusiast and spends her free time competing in autocross events. Welcome, Suze.
And tonight we also have Joanne Webb. Joanne Webb is a retired CUPE member and community activist from Hamilton. Joanne was involved with CUPE from 1985 until her retirement in 2016, serving in various roles with CUPE Ontario, including as the Aboriginal representative on the Ontario Executive Board. Joanne was an active member of CUPE Local 4800, Local 794, and Local 7800, holding various positions within the local. Joanne was active in the Hamilton and District CUPE Council and the Hamilton District Labour Council. Joanne was also the Aboriginal Vice President at the Ontario Federation of Labour. Welcome, Joanne. We also have Daniel Stevens. Daniel Stevens is a citizen of Nipissing First Nation of Anishinaabeg descent. Daniel is the alternate VP for the Ontario Federation of Labour's First Nations, Métis, and Inuit Circle. He is a member of the Ontario School of Secondary Teachers Federation, where he sits as a member of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit Working Group. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. So let's get right to it. Our first question is for all of you. Why was it important for you to be here today? We'll start with you, Suze.
Thank you so much. It's so important for me to be here today. Obviously, to be here on behalf of our leader and our entire NDP caucus to really engage in a powerful conversation that's needed at this specific moment in time about how we move past placating approaches to reconciliation and get to real action. And I think that that's what I think about when we're talking about moving from land acknowledgement to land back. And it's that missing action piece that's been absent from approaches to reconciliation that I've seen from any level of government to date. So really excited about the conversation that we're going to have.
Great. And Daniel.
I think for me, it's awesome to be here because, I'm not from CUPE. I'm an OSSTF member, and being in the classroom, a lot of what we're seeing today, a lot of the political strife really ties into sort of the tattered relationship with education, formalized education that we see sort of throughout the province. And it's nice to see that these things are changing, that we have a lot more Indigenous teachers in classrooms who are now speaking the truth, who are now teaching the true history of Canada to the next generation. And, this is all part of this larger movement of making sure that education becomes at the forefront, because without educating, we will simply repeat the processes that have harmed us for so long. And now that we are, within the systems and we are working with ministries at, provincial levels and federal levels, we are starting to sort of reassert our jurisdiction in classrooms and on land to make sure that our ways of life haven't changed, because they really haven't changed. Our jurisdictions still exist, even with the treaty, exist prior to treaty. And these are truths that we all hold dear to ourselves, and we will teach those to the next generation. So that's why it's so important for me to be here today. And thank you once again.
Thank you. Joanne?
Hi, my name is Joanne Webb. Since I've retired, I consider myself as an armchair activist. I here mostly to promote the Friendship Center and the Friendship Center movement. I can tell you over the past couple of years that I've been on the board, the very active Friendship Center that we have that are getting out to the community and helping. And mostly it's because of education. We can educate the people, they actually go out and educate people that are renting out their houses to educate what's happening. So I really here to promote the Friendship Center movement. Miigwech, thank you.
Great. And Skylar?
Sorry about that. I was trying to unmute myself there. Well, I'm Skylar Williams, and yeah, like I said before, I'm from 1492 Landback Lane. I was born and raised in Six Nations, and I'm really happy to be here to, continue to build those friendships and those allyships with both as a union member, as I am a union member, as an iron worker, as a Indigenous person here, defending our lands and trying to uphold our rights as Ungwahome people from Haudenosaunee people. Yeah, we just want to make sure that that those friendships are tended to, and made sure that we're able to extend that hand of friendship to our friends and allies out there.
Thanks, everyone. Joanne, this next question is for you. You have been active in the labor movement for decades, both in CUPE, but also at the OFL and in your labor and CUPE council. Now that you've retired, you are still very active at the Hamilton Regional Indian Center. What does your activism look like now? How has Indigenous solidarity changed in the labor movement, and how can we continue to progress?
As I said, I've become an armchair activist, but I'm promoting the Friendship Center programs, and we truly support, to truly support the TRC calls to action. It is imperative that all unions or entities seek out collaboration with the Indigenous community and service providers. We need to engage with the partners, with Indigenous organizations and service providers. We can provide training, education, employment programs, and the programs available where the trainees, if Indigenous employees can receive financial support in things and proper workwear, support, safety equipment, and even union dues. We're also programs available that would subsidize the Indigenous trainees' wages for up to a year. So the Friendship Centers and other organizations programs can provide these ongoing supports. So we believe that the unions and their entities should get involved, even if it comes to going down to maybe, getting down to the grassroots and dealing with the Friendship Centers. But there's also the Ontario Federation of Indigenous Friendship Centers. And if you deal with them, they can tell you where all the different Friendship Centers are. So we truly believe that education and also in our culture, show our cultural, they're not only training, they're not just training, but they're not only teaching, giving the teachings to the clients, but they're also doing that to the people that are working there to help these clients, so they can truly pass on the culture and still help the people. And unfortunately, the Friendship Center is growing. We're growing out of our building, unfortunately, because we have to have so many programs to deal with the people that need help. So that's how I think my opinion is to deal with the unions, to get together with the Friendship Centers or the Ontario Friendship Centers, and try to work together and get some education going. Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne, for sharing. And I just want to let you know that many members often ask about you and what they can do to help progress the labor movement while keeping Indigenous solidarity in mind. So I'm sure you've given us lots of information to take back. So thank you for that. So this next question is for Skylar. Indigenous people are under attack from across our country. From lobster fishers in Nova Scotia to the criminalization of protesters in BC to even just this past weekend, the OPP arresting dozens of Indigenous and Black land defenders in Ottawa. We see Indigenous people facing renewed attacks from police, government, and settlers. We are so impressed, Skylar, with the courage and the integrity of you and the fellow land defenders have shown protecting unceded Haudenosaunee land for future generations. What can us as allies do to support your fight, including putting pressure on government to engage in meaningful conversations to protect your land from developers?
Yeah, I mean, I think I talk about this quite a bit. It's an issue of capacity, and so for each person, that capacity is like, who am I to tell anybody what their capacity is? And so for some folks, that means like allyship means, donating $20 to the GoFundMe campaign. For other folks, that means, coming out and spending the day and, bringing some hot food out or doing whatever they can to show that solidarity. For other folks, there's been a couple of ally folks that have come down here. I think it was like the third or fourth day and have just never went home. And, if coming spending the day or the weekend is within your capacity, or the week or the month or the rest of the year, it is up to you. And so for each person, capacity means very, very different things. And so we had some QP and OFL folks out this past weekend, and they came and did some building here on site. And so it's just amazing to have that lift in spirits, to be able to share stories, to be able to laugh, to carry on and do the things that we need to do to show that solidarity with each other. And so that allyship and whatever that looks is very, very an individual question.
Thank you, Skylar. We'll all do our very best to continue to help you in this fight. We all know about the use of injunctions, and we know about broken contracts. We also know the importance of a strong picket line, as it is the first line of defense. So it's important to remember your fight is also our fight. So we all need to stand together. Daniel, what can we do to educate others and support Indigenous land and treaty rights? How can we move from land acknowledgements into action to support Indigenous communities and demand land back?
I think it starts really with, looking at a lot of Canadian sides. I think Canada has a lot of options to its own people to look at their laws, to look at, what is accessible to them so that they can learn their true history. A lot of what has happened, Canada has done sort of the populist mentality of hiding. They write curriculum, they change curriculum to hide things. And unfortunately, it's like anything else, once we learn it in our formative years, it's very hard to unweave that tangled mess of lies. We're fortunate now that there's quite a few Indigenous teachers who are teaching in regular curriculum and are bringing back the truth and are telling our stories, the truth parts of our stories regarding treaties and Canada's place within those treaties. But it is about changing a larger narrative, and that takes time, unfortunately. This isn't something that will occur probably in my lifetime or in my career even. This is going to be something that will continue to go on. There is a lot of damage that has been done historically, firm to our beliefs and our ways of life, as well as educate those with whom we've as signatories to treaties, have decided to share the territory with. And I think that's really a big part of it, right? Canada has, in general, this concept of ownership of land, which they don't have. If you read the treaties, they're quite clear that most of the treaties are sharing access to Canada, but ownership is not really a part of many of the treaty languages. And again, this is language that is accessible to Canadians. They can read the treaties for themselves. They can educate themselves now, and that's a very, very important part. The TRC is very much a springboard to a depth of knowledge that exists on the Canadian side, and as well for us on the Indigenous side. We have to also, we are rebuilding our cultures and our languages and our ways of life as well, because so much of them have been decimated purposely. Through residential schools, through 60s Scoop, through the Indian Act, and everything else that was misappropriated against us. We are also educating our own people. We are fighting, really 3 layers of racism. From normalized racism to systemic racism to even legal racism when we look at things like the Indian Act, right? And trying to really break these things down, it really means that there's a lot of front. And like Skylar said, we have been decimated quite a bit, and we have to really work hard at fighting these on all these levels. Fortunately enough, we've learned the system, and we are now able to use it appropriately, and we are able to fight these battles in the courtroom with our friends on Facebook. And make these changes. But this is a long journey that we're all on, I think. And I think as Canadians, as anybody who wants to be an ally, who wants to, help us fight and change, Canada's narrative, it really starts with you and picking up, a book or a treaty, or start reading the Indian Act. And the story is quite clear. It's quite atrocious when you read these documents, that these are laws enacted that are in power today, November 24th, 2020, that these things are actually occurring to us right now. I had actually a talk with a class not long ago, just a couple days ago, actually, and we were talking about blood quantum calculators, and my students couldn't believe that actually still exists today. That's how they calculate status, is through a blood quantum calculator. And this is today. Some of our people are being rejected from status because of an arbitrary blood quantum, and educating people on those facts is what's most important, I think. And I think when we start looking at them, that's when people start to turn and look and go, well, we had no idea Canada was still doing this, and we still need a lot of work to be done. And that's when we gain allyships, and that's when we gain people who are willing to now open the door to rooms that we were not allowed to go into, and now allow us to walk into them and then change the narrative for everybody else who will be coming after us in generations. This is a very long journey, and the education that has to happen is exceptionally deep and exceptionally wide. How to go from land back, I said it before, our traditional ways, our traditional territories have not changed. We still have treaties with nations amongst nations. Canada is just another nation, a newer nation, a 152-year-old nation on territory that has existed for relationships that have existed between nations for thousands of years. Canada is just the newest member of that grouping. And we need to learn to respect each other's jurisdiction. We need to be able to respect each other's place on this land, and understand that when we mean share, we do mean share. It doesn't mean we gave it up. It didn't mean that Canada now owns the land. That's a narrative that does need to change. And I think once we do that, that's how we'll go from land acknowledgements to land back, is when people will take the time, will learn to that tattered history, and learn really what has occurred and what is occurring today. Thank you.
If I could jump in, I mean, you made some really good points there. And I think, when you talk about, oh, I had no idea these things were, when people say, I had no idea these things were going on in Canada, that is so often the case. I mean, people, again, are so quick to forget, or are never taught, that we had residential schools in this country operating until into the mid-90s, that you know, there are more children in care abducted from their families through our so-called care systems than there were child removals at the height of the residential school system. That is contributing to the ongoing, you know, breaking up of families and cultures. You know, we have so many communities who don't have access to clean drinking water, not just in the north. I mean, ask Skylar. Skylar, does your community have clean drinking water? No, it does not. And it's, you know, folks don't realize that colonization isn't something that happened and is done. It is an active and ongoing process. And I think it makes sense to get that conversation of land back, because every level of government in Canada hasn't stopped doing it still.
And it also, people need to realize that as treaties are signed, treaties are being signed. The most recent treaty was just signed in September. Treaties are still shaping Canada. We, you know, the biggest one, and I always like talking to my students, is when I started going to school, Canada had 2 territories. And then in 1999, they signed a treaty, and now there's a third territory. Canada's shape, the political landscape of Canada changes because of these treaties, because Indigenous people have agreed to share. You know, whether it was purposely or through duress, those are things that need to be looked at. But definitely there is a sharing there, and there is definitely that the reason why Canada exists in the form that it exists in is because of these treaties. If we look at even the history of Manitoba and how it actually grew from its early, very early on sort of inductions into Confederacy, it is because treaties were signed out west, and that allowed Manitoba to grow. It allowed Alberta to grow. It allowed Saskatchewan to grow. It allowed BC to exist. Without these treaties, it would be a completely different situations. Even down south, when we look at the concession treaties down south, that's what allowed Toronto to grow. That's what allowed Ottawa to exist. That's what allowed Hamilton and Kingston and Windsor, all these big metropoles to exist, are again because of treaties. These are fundamental to Canada on so many levels, and yet it's completely hidden. I remember when I went to school, I went to French school, so it was Jacques Cartier. Jacques Cartier showed up, met some Indigenous people. Then we didn't hear about Indigenous people until the mid-70s. And that was essentially the history that was taught. I'm glad to see things are changing. That's no longer acceptable, and we are moving forward with that thing, but we still have a very, very long way to go. And I think Canada needs to really take the time to read the documents that they produce. The Indian Act is not an Indigenous document. It's a document produced by Canada. The treaties are documents produced by Canada that they came to us. We didn't go to Canada to ask to sign a treaty. Treaties came to us. We had the territory, we have the resources, we have all the things that Canada needed access to, and they asked to sign treaties. We signed. There's some mutual benefit to it. It's not all, you know, doom and gloom, you know, public health care and other things that happen, but there are definitely things that need to be definitely considered and looked at and properly learned. And that's not the case in a lot of systems. And I think that's where that's where the focus needs to be. If we're going to be talking about land back, we really need to be looking at it as, well, why was it taken in the first place? When we look at the treaties, it was taken up sort of illegally, right? And even by Canadian standards, it was taken up illegally.
Thank you for those that insight, Daniel. There's definitely some suggestions in there that we can all look at and we can all do. So Indigenous people have inequitable access to basic necessities like housing, clean water, and health care. What are some of the things that the Ontario NDP are doing to address these issues, and what can people listening tonight do to support your efforts?
Thank you so much for the question. It's a good one. So I made a quick list, so I didn't kind of miss things because we've got a lot that we're working on. I mean, overall, I would say there's kind of 2 big pieces. It's good policy around Indigenous specific issues that are directly for Indigenous people. And then also good social policy that is so core to the NDP that also benefits Indigenous people who are overrepresented in some of our most neglected social systems. So, when we're talking about things like, investments in affordable housing, well, we have to recognize that, a higher percentage of Indigenous people are in core housing need across the province. We also have to have a conversation about the availability and funding for on-reserve housing as well. When we're talking about social assistance and looking at the criminally low rates of ODSP and OW in this province, and making sure that folks are actually able to live on those social assistance rates. Well, we also then have to acknowledge that there are disproportionately there's a disproportionate overrepresentation of Indigenous people in the OW and ODSP system. When we're looking at the healthcare system, when we're making a system that's equitable to access, we're improving access for Indigenous people who, again, often have worse outcomes in our health system for a number of reasons, including, availability of health services in remote and rural areas, as one example, but also racism in our health system that is killing Indigenous people. So I think there's kind of those pieces that are, good social policy that, aren't specific to Indigenous people and communities and nations, but it's good social policy for Indigenous people. And then we have really, specific Indigenous policy as well. I mean, when we were in the 2018 campaign, the most uplifting part of running for me, running in the 2018 campaign as a first-time candidate, who never actually believed for a second I was going to get elected. But the most amazing part of that campaign was when I would go to these big rallies and I would hear Andrea stand up on a stage and really call out the jurisdictional ping pong that has happened with the responsibility for clean drinking water in the province of Ontario, and ensuring that every First Nation in this province has access to clean drinking water. And I watched her as my leader stand up on that stage and say, the time for jurisdictional disputes is over. There is a right thing to do here, and it's clean drinking water for every single person in this province. And as an Ontario NDP government, we're committed to funding that to make it happen. And then we'll send the bill to Ottawa and sort it out jurisdictionally after the fact for who's actually responsible for footing the bill, because arguably it is a federal level of government that's responsible for that. But the time for the federal and provincial governments disputing basic services, basic humanity, debating children being able to have baths, being able to drink their own tap water, this shouldn't be a debate in 2020. It shouldn't be a conversation about how do we pay for it. It's not an overly expensive project. There's no political will to do it. And so for me, that was just honestly the highlight of the 2018 election campaign for me, was that commitment. And it was the first time I had really seen that bold of a commitment to actually taking action on reconciliation in provincial politics before, and it was just phenomenal. So I mean, I think that was a big part of our campaign commitment. We also had pieces around education and curriculum, and it became actually one of the first things we had to go to bat for in 2018 when we got into the legislature as official opposition. Was we had come in, thinking we were going to be able to fight for enhanced curriculum and education around Indigenous histories and reconciliation. And then what did we see Doug Ford immediately do as one of his first acts? Was cancel the curriculum writing sessions for the school boards to include reconciliation as part of our education system. Because he didn't want to spend the money for, a dozen educators to fly into Toronto to spend a week writing curriculum. He was that cheap. And so he shorthanded the education of an entire province because he didn't want to pay for a couple of plane tickets for educators to come together. The worst part was he canceled that planning session within days of it taking place, and they still had to pay for, you know, the rooms they had booked and the flights that had been booked, and so they paid for curriculum that was never written. And I mean, I think that just speaks volumes about the values of the Conservative government. And then in the next breath, when they announced their cabinet, they eliminated the minister responsible for Indigenous Affairs and Reconciliation. We have no direct minister responsible only for Indigenous issues in the province of Ontario. They collapsed that responsibility into the ministry responsible for mining. And if that doesn't tell you how this Conservative government sees foundationally its relationship with Indigenous peoples, it signals everything. It's the Conservative government saying, we only understand this relationship as connected to the value of what we can extract from the land. That they inherently embed that relationship into mining. And can't imagine a relationship that looks like anything other than a conversation around natural resources. It's just despicable. So I mean, so these are some of the pieces that we've been fighting now for the last 2.5 years, trying to hold this Conservative government accountable as the official opposition, while simultaneously trying to advance good policy, like clean drinking water, like good education. And most recently, you know, as we look at, you know, responding to things like increased police violence against Black and Indigenous and racialized people, you know, also trying to advance a conversation around, okay, how do we look at policing and the role of policing in communities, and how do we start shifting resources, you know, as activists and community folks are calling, so that we're doing things like investing in an alternative first response model for mental health. You know, why do you need a gun to respond to a mental health crisis? You know, so, you know, putting together, we recently released and I'll share it in the chat below, or Carissa, if you can find it, the policy document we released a little bit ago, ending police violence. Oh, you're so good. She found it before I could even name off the document. Ending police violence and investing in Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities. You know, these are some of the policy pieces that we're working on. But at the end of the day, we're always going to be in a role of holding successive Liberal and Conservative governments accountable for their failures to address reconciliation in any kind of meaningful way, unless we can get an NDP government elected to government in 2022. And that is the goal right now. That's how we you know, take these really great policy ideas and turn them into action. So for whatever call to action it's worth is, you know, get out there and support your local NDP candidates, you know, if these are the priorities you want to share in 2022.
I just want to jump in on that, Suze, too. I mean, hi, Suze. Good to see you again. But yeah, no, there are a lot of shortcomings. And certainly when just on the end there, you were talking about the policing issue, but also after the policing issue becomes a court issue. And so there's a massive divide that I know like a lot of the Gladue stuff talks about. And, you know, it's been well enshrined in the Supreme Court and the Ontario Court of Appeal about just how massive a divide there is between Indigenous people and the court system and the court process. And so it sees that court process is seen, you know, and for women especially, it sees our prisons here in Ontario with 25% of the population of all the prisons here in Ontario are filled with our Indigenous women. You know, and so this is absolutely, when we make up 3% of the population, it is absolutely despicable that we are failing as a province and more broadly as a country to see Indigenous people in prisons, in jails, and in some form of the justice process. And so it's really hard, certainly sitting in the position that I am right now, getting ready to, you know, embark on that journey. And certainly in the civil proceedings, we tried to bring up some stuff there, and that was and absolutely disgusting, infuriating for an entire, not just my community, but Indigenous people across the country to see myself not even be able to defend myself or defend my community in the court proceedings against me. And so I think these are over and over and over again, these overarching displays of that divide. That's all I got for that one.
Thanks,
No,
Skylar. Oh,
it's such a-
sorry.
I wanted to follow up on that last little piece too, because there's also this piece that I've been stewing over for the last little bit as I think about Skylar, you going through these court proceedings, and again, the pieces around like the injunction and the civil suit, and our system is inherently, like, our legal system is married to capitalism, in that right, corporations have more standing in our legal system, and Skylar's laughing as he's facing a suit for $20 million civilly. They have more standing and ease to navigate our legal system than human beings do. And land and Indigenous rights don't have the same sort of standing in a legal sense in a court as a corporation does. And Skylar, I've been, trying to follow along your legal battles from the sidelines. And all I can do is say, I'm so sorry that our legal system is what it is. And it shouldn't be that way.
I just want to step in and say, that's I said, unfortunately, our Friendship Center is growing so big because that's what we do, is try to help people, guide them through the court system. And there's just so much of it going on, especially in the community. We're only dealing with the urban natives, and it's a full-time job, and like we're running out of space. There's just such a need for people that need help, and it's constant.
Yeah, and I think, if I can just jump in, that's where the systemic racism is, right? It's in these proceedings and these practices that are really not designed to be, for us, to be welcoming our ways, our traditional ways of being. We have our own legal systems. I would like to see sort of Canada take a step into those systems and see whether or not they would be able to navigate them, with the ease that they present themselves. And you're exactly right. This is very much married to capitalism. It's very much married to high-end corporate lawyers who do this for a living. It is not designed for people who are trying to stand up for what is right.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks, Skylar, and also Joanne for continuing that conversation. And thank you so much, Suze, and thank you to the NDP for all their hard work with these issues. And again, thank you to each and every one of you for the incredible conversation this evening. I've learned a lot, as I'm sure others in the call have as well. But I want to give you all a chance to wrap up and make any final comments. In doing so, I'm hoping you can suggest one tangible thing that people who have joined us today can do to better support Indigenous folks in their communities or in the province. So we'll start with you, Joanne. I think you're on mute, Joanne.
All right,
There you
I'll
go.
get used to this stuff. I'm going to say it in my own words. What I was trying to say in my statement is that the unions, I think they're doing a good job, but they need to get involved, even if it is at the community level, and work with companies to start mentorships and trainings. And there's a lot of help out there that they wouldn't even, like, we could even pay. There's organizations that will pay for a mentorship for 1 year. So employees would be, if they knew about it, they may be eager. The only thing that we would agree on, or would think would be really good, is if they also negotiated to create a culturally safe workplace, to negotiate language that would enforce discrimination policies through staff training and cultural awareness, and promote supports for all staff, including the Indigenous staff, where they can safely voice their concerns and complaints of harassment and discrimination. And the only other thing I can add is, if you're interested in dealing with it, to go to the ofifc.org website, and it's all in layman's language, so everybody can understand what they're saying. That's a good place to go to. Miigwech, thank you.
Thank you. And Skylar?
Yeah, the takeaway. I mean, it's always really difficult. I mean, to reach out to your local politicians and to put pressure on them to say, you know what, you guys need to be stepping to the table. I mean, the NDP has gone as far as to come on out to Land Back Lane, and I know I've met Susan on a couple of occasions now down here at Land Back, and I've been fortunate enough to take her around, but we want to see some of those politicians from the other parties as well, and so if they are the elected officials in whatever riding you're in, that's a phone call or a door knock that you need to make, and certainly in terms of come on down the Land Back Lane whenever if this is something that you have capacity for, to come on down and share some stories and understand why it is that we're here, and I mean, there's only so much that I can say in this 10 minutes or an hour or whatever that, but the amount of knowledge and about as much of that determination and that we have here, and to find out why it is that we are the way we are, and fighting the fight that we're in the middle of here is really important for folks, and despite us being called terrorists and every other horrible thing under the book by the Haldeman Police Services Board and the mayor and Haldeman County, Ken Hewitt, I guarantee you I'm the nicest terrorist you'll ever meet. So I mean, so please come on down to Land Back Lane and have those discussions.
Thank you. And Daniel?
I think the biggest thing, especially if you sat on several webinars and you read a lot of information, try not to get overwhelmed. If there's one takeaway I always tell my students is really take the time to reflect on the information. Try not to get overwhelmed, but understand that when you walk through a door and people start to talk about other people, ask why those other people aren't in the room. Open the door, allow those who are being spoken of or for to step in and voice themselves. I think that's really when we talk about, breaking down these barriers, it's knowing that we don't know everything and being okay with that, and allowing those the opportunity who do know more, who do know best, to be in that space to guide the way. I think it's call it a traditional way of thinking, but it was definitely the way I was raised, was to allow those who know best to lead. And that way you won't be steered in the wrong direction. You will be able to break down the narratives, the wrong narratives, and will be truly on the path of reconciliation in that way. Miigwech.
Thank you. And Suze?
I would say I have 2 calls to action. One would be call, write, and harass your member of provincial parliament to do better, and to engage on Indigenous issues, to engage on issues that are difficult and complex to navigate sometime and aren't quick and easy sound bites for us. I mean, to do the work, to go down to Haudenosaunee territory and understand the history of, sorry, my dog is barking, the history of the land disputes and the history of that territory and the history of that nation. Takes work to understand the nuances of the issues. And as politicians, we have to be better at it. So call, write, email your members of provincial parliament. Make sure that they know that their constituents will not re-elect members who don't think it's a priority to have clean drinking water in every single First Nation in Ontario. As one example. The second call to action I have is if you are an Indigenous person on this webinar and you think you could do a better job being an MPP than your current Conservative representative, I want to know who you are. And we are actually having, I'm going to plug for my own thing that we're doing, I think later this week. I think it's in a couple days. I don't have the details in front of me, but the Ontario NDP is actually doing an equity seeking candidates webinar to kind of explain the process of what it's like to run for the first time as an equity seeking candidate. And I would love to see more Indigenous candidates running in the 2022 provincial election than we've ever seen before. It brings, you know, a powerful voice into the legislature. That is a building that was never designed for Indigenous voices. It was never designed for women. It was never designed for racialized people. And the mere existence of Indigenous voices in that space is resistance. So come and run for us. And if you don't know what any of that means, come and check out our webinar, which I think Carissa has already linked to because she's so great. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that, Suze. You've given me a lot to think about. So anyways, this has been such a wonderful evening. It's been very informative. Thank you so much for everyone for taking the time and talking about all these great topics and sharing your information and stories. And thank you for everyone who's participated tonight in joining us. Thank you for your time. I hope that everyone has a great evening. And for the future, I just want to let you know that our last webisode for this season will be in December, and it'll be Ask Fred Anything. So we're putting Fred in the hot chair or the hot seat, and this will air in December. So keep your eyes peeled on the CUPE Ontario social media pages. And I can't thank you enough for joining us tonight.